Behold, my glorious supporter Cvoid wants to discuss the Corpus Lich system with a hypothetical Corpus Lich system. Cvoid asks, what weapons would you like to see or think would be good for Warframe for the Corpus Lich system, and maybe Infested or other factions? What would be good to add other than like weapons? Could we add things like pets, sentinels, amalgamish, rivenish mods you suggested, etc.? I think that having it be a mod that you get from killing a lich is kind of an interesting idea. So the idea here would be you have a Riven and its stats could get better with valence transfer type features. That's not a bad idea, but I think that there's enough design space just with companions that I'm more excited about that. I think the obvious thing is like MOAs that have some kind of innate statistical bonus or that add an element to the robotic weapon they use, maybe a robotic companion that isn't a MOA, that somehow doesn't equip a robotic weapon, or has its own companion sentinel weapon, a robotic weapon that has randomly rolled stats. That could be a thing. That's pretty simple because that's pretty much like the Lich system we have. People might not be very excited about that. It could be that you have the MOA, and then people could be excited about that. And the MOA doesn't have random stats, but the MOA comes with a robotic weapon that does have random stats. So that would be a way to get that if for the people like me that want a random stat rolling like Kuva Lich weapon, but it's a robotic sentinel weapon. For those people, we can get that without other people being, rolling their eyes at that reward because they'll get a MOA companion that is hopefully really good for some reasons. What could it do that would be good? I guess it would need to be able to equip precepts of its own, like it would need to have a distinct set of precepts. The current MOAs we have, of course, have this sort of modular precept thing where they can equip a bunch of different precepts, but only any two of the six that Fortuna MOAs, we're going to have to call them, since we now have Corpus Lich MOAs. And Corpus Lich MOAs would have to be like their own thing, the way that Worm is a different sentinel from Jin, and Worm has some signature precepts, and Jin has some signature precepts, right? We would have to do it like that, I think. But it's possible that there could be some way to, just to back up for a second, I feel like the important thing is that you don't just have to get the MOA to get the two additional new precepts that you can then use in normal MOAs. Like, that's just very throwaway, you know what I mean? We want it to be something you actually use the item you get. What kind of stats would this thing have? We're talking about the Corpus Lich MOA. You could randomly roll the stats. Now that's sort of an obvious design space we could tackle that I'm not that excited by. You could have it be the amount of health, the amount of armor, that's more of a draw. The amount of shields, that's more of a draw. That's more exciting. That stuff is random. You could do that. I don't know. I'm just not. I can't get behind that somehow. I am a little interested in this idea that you could have sort of an elemental bonus that the robot always has when it uses other robotics weapons. So you give it my Death Machine Rifle Prime, and that's built with, corrosive or whatever, and you could roll a Corpus Lich MOA that has innate radiation whenever it uses any weapon. So it just does more damage and it, does something on top of that. Again, I feel like that's a little awkward. Like, I feel like the implementation is a little odd and confusing. Many of you will have watched me long enough to know that my design philosophy, not that I am a game designer, but is to keep things simple unless they need to be more complicated. I think that is the best way to do most everything. And I think that it might be overcomplicated to give the MOA random elemental bonus stats, but you could give its weapon random stats, and then I don't know, like, is it really compelling for the MOA itself to have random stats? That could be a sort of way to skirt around the fact that the MOA doesn't have random stats, but then people that don't want the weapon will have to settle for the fact that they don't want to get more than one. Like, once they get one MOA, they just don't care. And then that comes back around to bite the people like me who want the good elemental weapons, because we can't buy them from people because they're not going to farm those MOAs, so they're not going to have good... Does that matter? I don't know. Tell me in the comments if you think that matters. Let's talk about Sentinels, though. So MOAs, I think, is the obvious one, and there are some complications now that we're getting into it. But let's talk about Sentinels. So, yeah, you could do stats. You totally could. You could have it be, like, increased stats from the base version of the Sentinel. How about a Kuva Oxalis? That's the very first thing I thought of when I read this question. You got your Kuva Oxalis that has better stats by some degree, like better maybe health or shields or armor or a mix of them, depending on, I don't know, like what element you do. You see how that is a little awkward though? Um, Again, you could have its weapon have random stats. I think that's not compelling for a lot of people, even though it could matter. But there are a few Sentinels that would be very interested in getting an upgraded form, and so like Oxalis and Taxon, both Corpus or like Tenno, which is a little bit close to Corpus, Sentinels, right? Especially the Oxalis, like just doesn't really do anything except it's convenient for fishing. If you're not a gambling man, if you know what I'm saying. Smita Cvoid, shout out. So it would be nice to see that get upgraded. It would be interesting if maybe they could use like different precepts depending on like what you roll on them or something. But I don't see how you would roll random stats on the precept. That's really awkward. You see how implementing it is just kind of weird. So I definitely think Sentinels like robotic companions, that's like an obvious awesome point of design space, and it would add some depth to those companions. Another great thing about that is that a lot of players are sort of underwhelmed by the companions we have, even though they are quite good, like they provide pretty solid benefits. I think as an overall part of the game, current companions in Warframe in May 2020, I actually did just check the date, but anyway, yes, it's May 2020, I knew that totally, are strong enough to warrant your investment. You invest in them, and you could invest in only one or two, and you get that on every loadout for the whole time you play the game, and there aren't really any drawbacks. Like running none is obviously wrong, and then running one with its weapon usually protects it more than it hurts it. It could occasionally situationally draw more aggro to it, but it will save you and it plenty of times if you're running a useful sentinel weapon. To the point that I feel like they are useful, but the player base doesn't think that. And something that at the time of this recording, we've been complaining a lot about viral and game balance, and talking about how a lot of players, I think that they don't care about the game being balanced, and the developers maybe think it doesn't matter that the game be super balanced. But you're all wrong if you think that, and I'm totally right. Listen to me. I'm not that confident, but there are benefits that I think those people are not seeing that balance provides to the game. And one of the ways that you can deal with that type of issue that I don't love, but it's an important part of game development, is just to make new things that use that design space for the developers to, step up and say, people don't get that this useful system is useful, so what if we make an exciting thing so that they want to try it? Like, it's simple as that. Now, that doesn't solve the issue of, why did they come to think that that thing is not useful, and solving the core problem. But it's still a very useful solution, right? Very related to just making the thing more useful. Like I don't think you should do this because I think it would be a little bit too strong, but like you could just make companions better. Like I don't think you need to do that, but that would be another way to go. So without actually damaging the actual balance of the game, you can kind of make the community's impression of the game be closer to what it actually is, which is beneficial because the actual state of companion balance is good and can add some diversity to your gameplay by just making a new exciting companion. And what I think doing that in the Corpus Lich system would be great. However, as we're talking about this, you can really see it's not the most trivial thing in the world. Like there are problems that I did not even fully write in my show notes as I briefly glanced at them. More problems than I had anticipated on my cursory little prep. So I don't know. I do think it's a really good idea. I think that it's quite possible to make it work. I think that valence transfer has possibilities that have not been fully tapped into. Basically, that sounds more complicated than it is. I feel like the element thing, where you kill a lich with a certain warframe that corresponds to a certain element, and then the weapon gets that element, I feel like that system is a bit extra, and you could kind of just get rid of it and have it be like, this thing rolls random stats, but they're generic. It doesn't matter what warframe you spawn it with. And then, sure, the companion's weapon could have stats that depend on the warframe you whatever, and the other Corpus Lich weapons, I have a few ideas for that, which we'll get to in a minute, those could have random stats, right? But is it really necessary for there to be like, I kill my Corpus Lich with Saren versus, say, Ember? Does the the Corpus Lich companion, the Corpus Lich Moa, really have to have like a different quality just because I killed them with a different Warframe? No, you could just get rid of that feature for that one thing, you know? They work the same, except there just isn't a difference between your Corpus Lich Moa made with a Saren versus made with an Ember, you know, like just because it's overcomplicated for there to be. So let's just not have one of those. And instead, they just have a stat threshold. So they get increased health, shields, armor, you know, whatever, based on whatever you roll. So like normally you'd roll between like 30% and 60% bonus, whatever type of damage. But this is a MOA, so we're not, for the MOA part, we're not doing that. That still happens on the weapon, but that's separate. And the MOA just rolls 30 to 60% more stats. And then if you get another one that has a higher thing or not, you can combine them to, you know, rank it up. So there's still an incentive to get them, you know, one after the other. That might be a little oversimplified, and it's a little weird because it's like taking a step back in complexity, not something that Warframe often does. Which I don't like. It's neither here nor there. A lot of games don't do that where I think they should. They have a system in place and they follow the rules a little too strictly and don't use design space they could have by simply quickly omitting a small detail for like one part of the thing. Just a personal design soapbox of mine. I feel like subtractive game design that makes the game simpler sometimes is a thing that is underused. But anyway, that's a thing you could do. So let's build out a theoretical little pool for what this Cvoid could have. So they're not Cvoid, I guess. They're Corpus Liches. I'm not going to talk about flavor. I'm not the person to go to for that. Why are they Corpus Liches? I don't know. They're amalgam liches, you know, like that's the thing that comes to mind. They are like sentient and corpus liches. I think the lich system is best pursued. Fine, we'll talk about lore for like 1 second. As like the lich system as a topic. It's not like every faction drinking kuva. It's like every faction's like a team, you know, like they're like SWAT unit that is the counter the Tenno. And so for the Grineer, it's Kuva Liches. For the Corpus, it could be like amalgam lieutenants or something. They're just like the really souped up unit of that faction that has, because they're amalgams, they can adapt to your Warframe's abilities, and that's why they're different depending on what Warframe you engage them as, right? And maybe they don't die, but they flee because they're not Kuva Liches. They don't have to die to be made. So again, you can easily tweak like little bits of flavor here and there. And for the Infested, just to briefly call out to that, I'm not going to have time to cover that in this video, but the idea of having like an Infested Lich system thing, the Infested already adapt. They're these evolving sort of gray goo dudes. And so it's easy to imagine how these things could adapt and work basically the same way as the Grineer Lich system, but just be a different faction and not be just Corpus drinking Kuva and then Infested drinking Kuva, you know. I don't know what you do for Infested, but for the Corpus, it's obviously amalgams. And then they have sentient stuff, so they already adapt. Perfect. So let's build out a quick little drop table and imagine how this might feel. I think that one of the problems before we get into a few Corpus weapons is that a lot of the... as I looked through a lot of the Corpus weapons, we're in a place where when the Kuva Lich system came out, we were kind of like just finishing up balancing a lot of the weapons in the game. And right now, weapon balance, not, you know, status notwithstanding, currently we're in the middle of the viral outbreak in more than one way with weapon balance. But besides that, like how many weapons are really good? If you were to do a tier list, how many of them are like above a C? It's like almost all of them. And so when you think about making lich weapons, the obvious thing to think is which weapons need to be buffed. And looking through the list of Corpus weapons, not very many of them need to be buffed. You know what I mean? Like there's just not a lot of them that are not already really good. And so there's a way in which, personally anyway, I feel like if you pick a weapon that people already like, already have Formud, that's what I'm getting at here, I kind of don't want there to be a better version of it. You know what I mean? So this makes it a bit harder because we have to either kind of dig deep and use weapons that people don't like, meaning that an upgraded variant of them is less exciting. For Kuva Liches, this is your Kraken. Nobody liked the Kraken. They upgraded it, and it is much, much better. It's a pretty good weapon, but nobody cares because nobody likes the Kraken, right? For Corpus Liches, for Corpus Liches, I think this is your Cycron, basically. The Cycron is one of the few-ish weapons that I think it's easy to think of how to buff it. It's not hard to buff, and it obviously needs a buff, but it's not very well liked. I know that whenever I say anything like this ever on the internet at any moment, somebody will say, I love that weapon. People use that weapon. They don't. Statistically, they do not. People do not like this weapon that much. And I can understand why, because it's not very powerful compared to other similar things. Beam weapons in general are in kind of an odd place right now. And so the Cycron could use a straightforward buff. But after that, there are only a few things where, like, I have a couple ideas that I think are a little obvious. The Ferox would make a nice Corpus Lich weapon. I think the Ferox has room to become more powerful in ways that are not just damage, so you can make it only a little bit stronger damage-wise, which is fine, because it's a more single-target-ish weapon. It's okay for those weapons to get a bit stronger. That's not much power creep, because this is a horde shooter. And then the tether range, when you throw it and it pulls the enemies in, that can become larger. And that becoming significantly larger doesn't usually make the weapon much more raw powerful, but it does make the weapon more useful in its utility niche. And if gas ever becomes good ever again, May 2020, status balance is pretty atrocious right now, but when gas was a usable element, and hopefully when it is again, the Ferox Tether is pretty good with gas and status duration. It can group a lot of enemies together, it stays down for a long time and holds them there, and then they gas proc each other for a long time. It doesn't kill enemies fast, but you can just throw it in a choke point and go away, and it will kill them over time. It would become much better at that if it had a larger pulling radius. Well, not much better, but definitely better. So that would be an easy upgrade, a weapon that people like well enough, and could get more powerful without being a balance issue at all. And again, I do think the exact amount of damage each weapon does is a lot less important type of balance than, like, status balance, for example. But then after that, to make a lot of weapons in an interesting way, we kind of have to start doing side grades, which can be very difficult. And I feel like in the Cvoid batch, I've been talking about this for a long time, and the reason is because this is sort of a complicated problem. In the Cvoid weapons, the Grineer Lich system weapons, a lot of them were side grades, and I think they were unsuccessful side grades. Not a lot of them, but a good few of them. A really good example was the comb. Yes, the Kuva comb. Could not come into my head because Kuva comb, I don't know, something, it's hard to remember. The Kuva comb is a bad example, a failure story in my mind, because after the pellet-based status calculation rebalance, the Kuva comb is basically just better than the normal comb. You want to build for the crit as well. It loses base damage and it gains a lot of crit. That is the amount of base damage it loses relative to the crit it gains is a fair trade, and you get more damage. Like, just build more crit. The only reason it was a side grade before was because when you needed to reach that 100 status before additional multi-shot threshold, having more stats to build to was not really as much of a straightforward advantage for the Kuva comb, because it still needed to use pretty much all of its mod space to get to that status threshold to be really good at all in the way it is. And so, yes, it had more crit that you generally did not have room to build for, meaning it didn't really benefit from that, and then it just has less base damage, which is not good. So the normal comb was in a lot of ways kind of better, and the Kuva comb just had a higher ceiling if you had a Riven, and yet they changed the disposition on the Kuva weapons to be lower. The Rivens are just a total mess and not a thing we're going to talk about very often ever again, probably. But yeah, so that's a debacle. But when they changed that over, basically the Kuva comb became a straight upgrade instead, and the side grade was not a bad idea, but it wasn't quite calibrated right. The way that it would have been an interesting side grade would have been if it had like a lot more status and more crit and lower base damage, but then also lower like fire rate or something. So you can build toward the stat it gained. You just have to give it some other support elsewhere. Whereas by limiting the amount of mod space you have, that puts you in a situation where, like, it could be a side grade if we had 10 mod slots, but we don't, and making it be based on Rivens is a terrible idea 100% of the time. Nothing should ever be balanced around Rivens. because they're massive RNG. I hope I don't have to explain why. So I don't know. I mean, that is a difficult thing to do. So I think that if this was my job rather than just the question you were asking me as a Q&A, basically it's like, okay, well, there are some obvious things, like put a new kind of like amalgam Moa in there, maybe make an amalgam version of the Oxalis, like something like that. So we have kind of a new companion, kind of an upgraded variant of a companion, and it's kind of a new upgraded variant. Maybe SETI, is that what the amalgam weapon thing is called that we got previewed in Scarlet Spear? The SETI Lacera. Anyway, like a SETI Oxalis, let's say. And then we have some kind of amalgam Moa. And those, again, the companion itself won't re-roll random like elemental stats depending on what Warframe you kill it with. It'll just get a flat stat increase that can be higher or lower, and then you can valence transfer to make it larger. And their weapons will get random stats the way that Kuva Lich weapons already do. And then we have weapons like the Cycron that obviously need a buff, and the Ferox, which could obviously take a buff. And then from there, the bulk of the work is going to be finding Corpus weapons that it actually makes sense to side grade. Because looking at the Kuva Lich weapons, there are quite a lot of them that are not really a relevant addition to the game. They're not bad. They're not useless either. It's not like they have no niche, but are they a robust addition to your arsenal? They're not at all. Like, there's really no reason. Even a lot of them that are really good, like the Kuva Karak, is quite a good weapon. I think is significantly stronger than many other assault rifles, for example. But I just don't think you need an assault rifle that is significantly stronger. That's all. It's worth having if you just want more damage, but you kind of don't. Like, it doesn't really have any new utility. And so I guess this would be freed up if it was my job to design this, I would say, please just put some harder content in the game so that I can buff weapons rather than making them all side grades, and it actually matters that they're a buffed weapon, There are also just a few weapons that maybe it's me and I didn't personally like that much. Not the biggest fan of the Kuva Chakher, which a lot of people seem to like. The Shieldig, which is literally just the hammer. It's not, again, unlike like pretty much all of them, it's not a bad hammer. It's just like, I don't need another melee weapon that is just the melee weapon. I don't care. It's stuff like that, And so I feel like that's not really like just to make a Corpus Lich system, but to make it really satisfying. And again, when you do things like adding companions, even if we're trying to make players like companions more by adding those in, it's not going to be a hit with everyone. So we need to find a way to add some new things and then add a lot of staples that the players feel like they obviously want. You totally don't obviously want weapons that just do more damage, but players feel like, okay, but this obviously benefits me, so it's fine if I get some things I don't care for because enough of the things are obviously good that I like it. And then there are, the trick of Warframe fundamentally is that as you get those things, you'll get a few weapons or companions or whatever that you wouldn't have thought you were going to like, and they'll be a nice surprise. And you'll pick up the Kuva Seer for me. I thought there's no way that I'm going to care about that much, but like, it's pretty solid. Like, I like that weapon. It's fun. It was a lot more fun when there was some status diversity, but haha. So anyway, I think that's the long and the short of it. I feel like that's what I would do if it was my job to do so. And they probably will do that, since we're talking about this. I feel like as a brief epilogue, a very brief epilogue, they're probably gonna make a Corpus Lich system. So I hope that they do these things because it would be fun. I would be interested in a little bit of a rollable companion, some somewhat modifiable companion weapons. I just like companions, you all know. And then things like the Cycron could be a really interesting weapon. It's just really weak at the moment. Things like the Ferox, I just like the Ferox. So maybe I'm biased. Maybe I'm just buffing the things that I like. But go figure. So Cvoid, thank you very much for your very interesting question. And I hope that we get all of this someday.